I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we're diving into an important book. It is called The Red New Deal. When everything is free, you are the price, by Dmitri Dubograev. In this provocative book, the author, an American IT and corporate attorney with Belarusian roots, shares his unparalleled insights into the creeping socialism that's hitting our nation, the United States of America, drawing parallels with his youth in the Soviet Union. Join us right now as we explore the fine line between social welfare and the loss of individual freedom through the eyes of someone who's lived through the empty promises and the perils of socialism. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight, and we ask viewers like you to support authors like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his important book. The links are below this interview. Dmitri, great to see you here today on Spotlight.
Thank you for inviting me. Nice to see you as well.
When I was a kid in school, the social studies teachers would like to teach us about the differences between democracy, socialism, communism. I could never understand the difference between socialism and communism. They're pretty closely linked, right?
I think so. And, when we were taught, and I've gone through school in the former Soviet Union as well as the studies at the universities, we were taught that socialism is a path to communism. But basically, I think the principles are more or less the same. When you're building something and you're on a way to it, I think the building principles and the structure more or less the same. However, typically in the Soviet studies, they teach you that, well, whatever the ramifications of the hardships of socialism are, they're going to be removed once we achieve that ivory tower called communism. So, and, different socialist leaders kept telling us, or the people of the Soviet Union, that, well, we're going to build communism by 1980, by 1990. And obviously, there were two parts to it. One is the moral part, the other is sort of economical. And economical always lagged behind, so they have to somehow justify the sort of the misery and the hardships of the Soviet Union with you just have to persevere a little bit till we get there. However, I think to me the reason for my book is that people think that communism is that achievable goal with virtue signaling and a lot of good humanitarian aspects. In my view, both of them are essentially built on false premise and the violence. So to me, socialism and communism are basically equalizing everybody's efforts and equalizing everybody's outcome. And basically, frankly, they don't really focus achieving socialism on the morality, but rather they or humanity, but rather on total wealth when everything is free. And hence is my spoof of the Steve Jobs saying that when everything is free, you are the price, and you meaning your freedom, your efforts, your ingenuity. That's where you basically lose yourself in that pursuit of that alleged ivory tower.
Exactly. It seems like when you have a socialistic or a communist society, there are only a few people who live in that ivory tower, and those are the so-called leaders, the dictators, the Politburo, and so
Correct.
forth. Interesting, on the cover of your book, it says, "Kill the rich." And this is almost a phrase that we hear nowadays in the United States. People walk around with gowns on that say "tax the rich," written in
Yeah,
what looks like blood.
yeah,
Pitting
that
the
was the
rich and the poor against each other is important when you're trying to install communism or socialism, right?
correct. That was the spoof of that famous dress. And basically, the cover was my idea, was implemented by one of the famous Belarusian um, uh, painters. But again, it's that violence that you basically try to pin rich and poor, or striving, and those who already achieved something. So it's a class warfare. And as you mentioned, in the socialism, you have essentially people that assume the role of those distributors of wealth. And in my book, I'm trying not to be too overly theoretical, and I think that's where I think people that vie for the uh, principles of capitalism, democracy lose, because they go into too much theory without really practical aspects of both freedom and capitalism. So I'm trying to be a little bit lighthearted with a little bit of anecdotes and tours to excurse to history that people could understand. So in my book, I talk about a cartoon in during the Soviet time where two little bears find a large piece of cheese, and they start dividing it, and one piece is larger, one is smaller, and they yell at each other, grab at each other. And there's a fox that says, "Oh, by the way, let me divide it for you." So she takes a bite of this larger piece, which becomes smaller, and then the other guy said, "Well, now is my larger, you're small." So she keeps biting of the both pieces and leaving them both with really, really tiny pieces of cheese, which are completely equal. And so the fox is the Politburo, or that omnipotent government that continues to give you the crumbs of its table. And obviously, people that at the top never forget to put themselves in front of that line. And that's the biggest thing, is that socialism essentially first based on violence, and it equalizes everybody's efforts. So you really don't have to try hard, relying on the big brother to have essentially taken fruits of the labor of somebody giving it to you. So it basically minimizes your efforts, and there's a so-called Greek word kakistocracy, which is essentially a selection of the worst kind in the governance. And interestingly, that the word kaki in Russian and Belarusian means essentially manure. Whether you adhere to the Greek language or the Russian language, the word kakistocracy means, uh, you know, unlike meritocracy, a social structure based on crappy choices.
Exactly. Let me pretend I'm a liberal Democrat for a second and say to you, why can't we have free health care in this country? We're such a rich nation. Why can't we have free education in this country? Isn't everyone entitled to a basic minimum living wage? Shouldn't everyone at least have a home in a country as wealthy as ours? Why should somebody like Elon Musk have billions of dollars when people who are on the assembly line in his factories are struggling to get by? Okay, that's me pretending to be a liberal Democrat. What say you?
And to continue on that topic, I think Mayor de Blasio said New York has a lot of money. They're just in their own hands. And that's the environment where I grew up at. And I think, responding to you as a liberal Democrat, first of all, the word liberal and Democrat is a dichotomy by itself. You can be both liberal and Democrat.
Exactly.
Because again, socialism is always based on violence and taken from somebody. But to me, there's a big difference between social nets, safety nets, whether it's pension or some minimum wage or anti-monopoly, and providing everybody, with free stuff. Margaret Thatcher said that the problem with socialism is that you run out of other people's money. And obviously, we're compassionate people in America. We all immigrants, the first generation. But for instance, I mean, the country cannot absorb 10, 12 million illegal immigrants. We're taking preference in healthcare and other things. So you have to understand that the sources, resources, and people's efforts to make those resources available have a finite number. I mean, if we had basically wealth coming on us from the sky as a rain, we would have just thrown things around. But that's just not possible. So if you reward people's inability to work, in not in a sense that somebody's handicapped, but in a sense that they just don't want to work, don't want to produce, and they still essentially take the wealth of the country or the human Western civilization, that actually reduces the basically stimulus to work and produce and ingenuity. So to me, people come to America, unlike France or Germany, not for the welfare. And they come here because it provides largest opportunity and greatest social lifts. So you could be, a waiter and then collect some money and then try to open your own restaurant, which is, one of the examples. So to me, the socialism itself, and at least the country where I grew up, shows as to where Soviet Union would come to, and we see Belarus and Russia now turning into essentially fascist states, invading neighbors, simply because they cannot, and really, frankly, they do not care for the wealth of their own people. So they need to show the greatness of their unachievable goals, and wealth or sympathy to your neighbor is not something that somebody like Lukashenko, Putin pursue. So they need to show the imperial ambitions and invade a neighboring country and killing people with alleged greatness and transforming this world as they see it, bipolar world. But if anything is bipolar, is their mentality.
Exactly. It's divide and conquer. That's part of it. Don't you think we are at a dangerous tipping point here in the United States? We are flooding this country with illegal aliens and migrants and undocumented people, and they're often allowed to vote. Once you're allowed to vote, to tax them, not me, we're in trouble, right?
Absolutely. And remember that the right to vote is, yes, reserved for the citizens. But one thing that people don't realize, census is not done based on citizenship. So if you flood a certain district with illegal aliens, right, and you know that Biden gives all that welfare and takes the money from working people and essentially invites everybody else, the redivision of voting would go heavily into the populations with a lot of illegal immigrants. So right to vote is not only literally go and cast ballot, but also distribution of resources and distribution of something that would be deemed resources of the government. And to me, we are the tipping point, and obviously no country could, or no house could be could survive with open doors without really seeing who is coming, who is going. And that's why we have a fentanyl problem. We have problem even with mentality when the president apologizes for the word illegal, but has expressed essentially no sympathy for the parents of the victim that was basically brutally murdered. And we are the tipping point, and I think the tipping point in many points, whether it's cancel culture, whether using law enforcement for political purpose, or essentially, giving away all these little bribes to the population by forgiving student debt. Yeah. So to me, we just going left and left and left and left, and at some point, and I provide a little bit of a scale how you evaluate various phenomena in the society on the scale 1 to 10 as to how close we're socials. And I think we still yet not at the point of no return. We still can return, but we have to essentially vote not because of our little tiny small self-interest or feelings. We have to look at the principal foundation of our society here in the US and vie for freedom, for ingenuity of inventors, and frankly for both negative as well as positive stimulus for population. If you steal, you go to jail. If you work, you get rewarded. And safety net is safety net, but it's far, far away from socialism principles that we started to adhere to, and that's the biggest issue.
Whoever thought we would live in a society where you can steal up to $900 worth of goods by shoplifting in San Francisco and you're not prosecuted? And that's one small example of how crazy our society has become, where it's like a
Correct.
science fiction novel where right is wrong, black is white, and so on. Everything is upside down. The name of the book is The Red New Deal. When everything is free, you are the price. It's a provocative book. It's a compelling book. It makes a great case as to why the American people need to desperately hold on to their valuable freedoms before they're taken away. Dmitri, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and I appreciate your opportunity to discuss my book with you and with everybody that listen to this podcast.
I appreciate your time. And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.